Welcome to the Explainer. So let's just jump right into this. When you hear the name Queen Victoria, what instantly pops into your head? Probably a stuffy, unsmiling woman dressed entirely in black, right? Like a stern statue from a bygone era of total prudishness and strict morals. Well, what if I told you that the real Victoria was actually nothing like that? Today, we are going to completely challenge that persistent stereotype. We're going to uncover the true story of a fiercely independent, highly emotional, and incredibly passionate woman who just happened to rule a massive global empire. Get ready, because this is a dynamic, character-driven look at the real Queen Victoria.
122. That is the staggering number of personal journal volumes Queen Victoria wrote during her lifetime. To really put that into perspective, historians estimate she wrote an average of 2,500 words every single day. I mean, this was absolutely not a woman who kept her thoughts to herself. She was a highly expressive, deeply emotional, and incredibly opinionated person who just poured her heart, her frustrations, and her intense joys right onto the page. Her diaries are literally the ultimate key to understanding the vibrant woman behind the crown.
Act 1. The Captive Heir. You know, Victoria wasn't actually born expecting to be queen. In fact, she was a total underdog, born into a bizarre and chaotic royal succession crisis. Let's walk through the highly unlikely sequence of events that actually cleared her path to the throne. It all started in 1817, when Princess Charlotte, who was the only legitimate grandchild of King George III, tragically died. Well, this sparked absolute panic among the king's aging, unmarried sons, who suddenly rushed to find wives and produce heirs. Victoria's father, the Duke of Kent, was one of those sons. So Victoria is born in 1819, placing her fifth in line to the throne. But then, almost miraculously, her predecessors, including her own father and her grandfather, died without any other surviving legitimate children. Suddenly, this young girl became the heir presumptive.
But once she became the heir, she definitely didn't have a fairy tale childhood. Actually, Victoria herself later described it as rather melancholy. She was subjected to what was called the Kensington system. This was an elaborate, extremely restrictive set of rules and protocols devised by her overprotective mother and her mother's ambitious comptroller, John Conroy. Their ultimate goal? To keep the young princess completely isolated, weak, and entirely dependent upon them. Victoria was forced to share a bedroom with her mother every single night. She wasn't allowed to meet people they deemed undesirable, and her only real playmate was her King Charles spaniel, Dash. It was just a completely suffocating environment.
Act 2. The Passionate Partner. When King William IV died in 1837, Victoria took the throne at just 18 years old and immediately asserted her independence. She banished manipulative advisors like John Conroy and moved her residence straight into Buckingham Palace. The captive heir was finally free. And she didn't just want independence, she wanted a true partnership. In 1840, she married her first cousin, Prince Albert. Now remember that Victorian prudish stereotype we talked about? Well, listen to what she wrote in her diary on her wedding night. "I never spent such an evening. His beauty, his sweetness and gentleness, really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband?" She went on to describe the evening as bliss beyond belief. I mean, this quote absolutely shatters the myth of the icy monarch. She was deeply, intensely in love, driven by a profound romantic passion.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that her private realities often sharply contrasted with her public image. Publicly, Victoria and Albert became the ultimate symbol of family values, eventually having 9 children together. But privately, her opinions were shockingly modern for the time. She actually hated being pregnant. She viewed breastfeeding with complete disgust and even wrote that she thought newborn babies were ugly. And when it came to childbirth, she fiercely advocated for herself. During the births of her 8th and 9th children, she insisted on using this new, highly controversial anesthetic called chloroform. She completely ignored the protests of the medical establishment and the clergy. She knew exactly what she wanted.
She was also incredibly brave. This timeline is just wild to look at. Think about the sheer number of terrifying assassination attempts she survived during her reign. In 1840, a teenager named Edward Oxford fired 2 shots at her open carriage. In 1842, there were 2 more attempts by John Francis and John William Bean. And it just kept happening in 1849, 1850, 1872, and 1882. But here is the amazing part. Her courage actually caused her popularity to soar. After John Francis shot at her and escaped, Victoria deliberately drove the exact same route the very next day. She knew he would try again, and she just baited him so plainclothes police could catch him in the act. She absolutely refused to hide away. Act 3. The Widow of Windsor.
Then, in December of 1861, Victoria reached a devastating turning point when Prince Albert died of typhoid fever. And suddenly, a deeply personal grief had massive global consequences. For years after Albert's death, Victoria completely avoided public appearances and just secluded herself in her royal residences. As you probably know, she famously wore black for the rest of her life. But this self-imposed isolation caused the monarchy's popularity to absolutely plummet. The public grew resentful, and for the first time in a long time, Republican movements in Britain actually began to surge. Protesters were literally pinning signs to the gates of Buckingham Palace, jokingly offering it for rent. Her personal tragedy almost led to the fall of the entire British monarchy.
During this really long period of mourning, Victoria sought comfort in some highly controversial friendships. Let's compare her two most famous later life companions. First, there was John Brown, a Scottish manservant who became so close to her that it inspired scandalous rumors of a secret marriage. Some people even started calling her Mrs. Brown. Then, later in life, she hired Munshi Abdul Karim, an Indian Muslim clerk who taught her Urdu and became a deeply trusted confidant. Now, this sparked intense racial prejudice and jealousy among her courtiers. But what you should really take away from this is Victoria's stubborn loyalty. She completely dismissed the fierce class and racial prejudices held by her family and staff, defending her friends against the entire royal establishment.
Act 4. The Imperial Matriarch.
Eventually, though, the Queen did return to the public eye, completely reinventing herself as a monumental global figure. In 1876, she took on the title Empress of India. She fully endorsed her Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli's expansionist foreign policies, which included the Zulu and Afghan wars, holding a genuine belief that the expansion of the British Empire was a civilizing and benign force. Yet, she was also the monarch during the devastation of the Great Famine in Ireland, where she was actually labeled the Famine Queen. This was despite the fact that she personally donated £2,000 to relief efforts, which was more than any other individual donor at the time. Her reign was just full of these massive historical contradictions. By the time she celebrated her Golden Jubilee in 1887 and Diamond Jubilee in 1897, she was revered by vast crowds as the grand figurehead of an expanding empire.
And she was quite literally a matriarch on a staggering scale. 34. That is the number of her grandchildren who survived to adulthood. Victoria and Albert had orchestrated marriages for their children and grandchildren into noble families across the entire European continent. She became famously known as the grandmother of Europe, weaving this incredibly complex web of family ties that linked the monarchies of Germany, Russia, Spain, Greece, and beyond. But unfortunately, those family ties carried a hidden, devastating legacy. We call it the royal disease. You see, a spontaneous genetic mutation in Victoria's DNA meant that she was a carrier for hemophilia B, which is a dangerous blood clotting disorder. Through her descendants, this disease spread directly to the royal houses of Russia, Spain, and Germany. It's truly incredible to think about. Her own micro-personal biology literally altered the macro fate of 20th century history. For instance, the illness of her great-grandson Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne, played a massive role in the destabilization of the entire Russian Empire.
So that brings us to the end of our journey today, and it leaves us with a really big question. How should we ultimately view the legacy of a fiercely emotional, isolated teenager who grew up to become the defining symbol of a controversial global empire? I mean, she gave her very name to an entire era, yet she completely defied the stereotypes we associate with it. She was a monarch of vast, sprawling power, yet she was constantly driven by deeply personal passions, intense grief, and stubborn loyalties. The next time you see a statue of Queen Victoria, I really hope you remember the vibrant, incredibly complex woman behind the stone. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.